welcome, and welcome all of you who are joining us today. My name is David Gamlin. I'm the Vice President of Midnight Golf Program. Today we're going to have a really interesting, I believe, really interesting and hopefully informative session on supporting first-generation college students. As we get started, I'd like to introduce for an opening, Ms. Kate Seng, please.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. So I am Kate Seng, a Senior Director at GHR Foundation based in Minneapolis. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan, so I welcome you all virtually to Minnesota. I'm sorry you can't all be here with us. It's a beautiful day, about 45 degrees, I think, so it's feeling warm. GHR was established over 50 years ago by Gerald and Henrietta Roundhorst, and our purpose is to be of service to people and their limitless potential for good. Our values include lead with love, reimagine what's possible, partner boldly, and navigate and adapt, which we all have been doing a lot of. Special thanks to Ashoka for all their navigating and adapting. GHR works in the areas of education, children and families, Alzheimer's prevention, and global development. In the education space, GHR works in Catholic urban K-8 education here in the Twin Cities, and my colleague Meg Gralon, who works in that area, is on the call today. We also, in the higher ed space, work with 3 long-term partners, Marquette University in Milwaukee, and then St. Thomas, our host, and St. Kate's in St. Paul. These institutions are all the alma maters of our founders, and we really work with these institutions in their overarching strategies, programming, student-centered learning, research, etc. When we became aware of the Ashoka Exchange being held in the Twin Cities with our long-term partner, St. Thomas, we were eager to join. We've had some really good, thought-provoking conversations with our Ashoka colleagues. And it's becoming increasingly clear that this next generation of college students won't look like any other in history. It's going to be an incredibly diverse group of students, many of whom will be first generation. What was striking us is I think so much of the conversation to date has been how students prepare themselves for the higher ed experience. And at least, if not more important, is how higher ed prepares itself for these students. So really looking forward to a robust conversation. I'll turn it back to David and we'll be eager to listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is David Gamlin, Vice President of an organization in the Detroit area called Midnight Golf Program. Midnight Golf has been working with high school students, helping them transition from high school to college to career for about 20 years now. We've worked with about 3,000 students, helping them through this transition. Probably a third to 40% of our students are also first generation college students. So we have some fairly intense experience with this unique audience of students and the unique needs that arise from this group. Today, we hope to uncover some of those, not challenges, but ways that we need to be thoughtful about how we make sure that they're successful. And we have a great panel today. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves and just talk a bit about their work and then how they came to this space. I'll start with Julie Carvalho, and then Gralon Johnson, Rebecca Otten, and then Felipe Valladares. If you would go in that order, please. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you. So I am Julie. I'm from North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I am the Director of First Generation Programs at North Central. 43% of our students identify as first generation college student, defined as neither parent having completed a 4-year degree. North Central College received its initial grant to work with first gen students back in 2008. It was specific to working with first gen education majors. And it's called Teach First. It's still in existence now, 12 years later. And in the fall of 2014, the college asked me to stop teaching in my faculty role and develop and launch a first gen program for the entire campus for all 43% of the students instead of just the education majors. So we now provide programming from their first day on campus through graduation and beyond. And Felipe Valladares, who you'll meet at the end of these introductions, is a student leader in our program.
Terrific. Gralon Johnson, please.
So I'm Gralon Johnson. Thank you, David. I serve as the National Director of Programs with College Possible, which is headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota. For about 20 years or so now, our organization has been focused on leveraging the power of young and really passionate recent college graduates who serve as AmeriCorps members to coach and support students from low-income backgrounds and students who are often first generation as they navigate the complex world of college preparation and persistence. More specifically, we really support our first gen and low-income students through 4 signature programs. We've got our flagship program that provides supports to students from their junior year of high school through college graduation. We've got our Navigate program, which provides outreach to high school students outside of metro areas through coaches who use the latest tech tools to offer virtual support and guidance. We've got our Catalyze partnerships, which allows College Possible to embed our coaching model and curriculum directly on college campuses throughout the country. And finally, our organization is a proud partner of College Point, a nationwide initiative with Bloomberg Philanthropies that helps students from lower income families apply to, enroll in, and ultimately afford top performing colleges. Between these 4 programs, we serve about 25,000 students across our national network.
That's terrific. Rebecca, please.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Otten. I work at Tulane University in New Orleans. I'm actually the director of our social innovation and social entrepreneurship minor, and that's how I was connected with the Ashoka U Exchange and larger network. But about 4 years ago, I was asked to apply to be a Posse mentor. So I work at Tulane with the Posse Foundation. And as a part of that, I met my 10 scholars from the greater New Orleans area. And it's a bittersweet moment because this is for many of them, their final semester. And so both the combination of them graduating, but also graduating during this time has been exciting and stressful and asking lots of questions. But so I think I would just say my role is a little bit different in that I do this outside of my core job responsibilities. I do it in support with a center on campus called the Center for Academic Equity. And that was established, I think, a year or 2 into my mentorship. So I've seen what it was like at Tulane prior to having that center as a kind of core support. And then since then, and a little bit of background about Tulane. We are a predominantly white institution in a majority Black city. And my scholars all come from the greater New Orleans area, but most Tulane students come from outside of New Orleans and Louisiana.
And Felipe, if you would.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Felipe Valladares. I am a student at North Central College studying actuarial science. So for those that don't know, just think of it as math behind insurance. So very exciting stuff there. But I'm a junior currently, first gen. I'm a part of the program that Julie mentioned, the Cardinal First program, which is the first generation college support program at our college. And not only do I serve as a participant of the program where I'm like receiving all the resources, but I'm also a leader of that program. So I'm here to just provide that student perspective, a current student that's seen kind of both sides of the story as both a recipient and now a leader of that program.
Terrific. Well, thank you all for those introductions and sharing a bit about your stories. We're going to go ahead and get started into this topic. You know, first generation college students and supporting the work that it takes to support them can be quite unique sometimes. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's not intuitive. It's oftentimes not intuitive, but it's really necessary. And considering, there's lots of considerations when you talk about college success and how you support students. I just want us to discuss 3 of them as we begin this conversation, and just your perspective on how you would balance the three of the what I think are the considerations. One being institutional support of the state of the universities and the institutions, the policies that help or are barriers for first generation students. Second, the support services that can come from community organizations, teachers, parents, the level of empathy that it really takes to be successful and in very thoughtful ways when you're talking about first generation students. But then finally, and some may think most importantly, the student themselves, their personal initiative and their initiative and motivation, their resilience, their energy, their passion, their narrative that's going on about who they are and what they're capable of. Measuring this, just those three considerations, how would you rank those or consider those? How would you reflect the importance of each of those? And we can start in the way we introduced ourselves, if you don't mind, with Julie.
Okay, thank you. So I think that institutional support is critical. I think oftentimes it starts with a passionate individual on the campus who decides that this is a group we should pay attention to, and they do it above and beyond their job description and start identifying the first-gen students on their campus. I think it's important for leadership at the top level to understand the value and the asset that first-generation college students are on a campus. So we have been fortunate at North Central that our culture now is first-gen status is a point of pride. We have 1.5 full-time staff members. We have every first-gen faculty and staff member on campus has a sign outside of their door, and they are proud and happy to support and engage with our first-gen students. So I think institutional support is essential in making students feel welcome also on the campus, and that they are valued and that they are a part of it. And I do think it's a balancing act between the institution supporting students and having the resources. And I don't know if we're going to have this conversation now, David, about helping get students connected to the resources, or do you want to save that for the next question?
No, it'd be fine to plug in. That does reflect into what you've learned through your experience. So,
right. So okay.
So
one of the things that that I have found in working with first generation college students, which I've worked at this college for 23 years, in the past 6 years in this role with first gen student initiatives, is that our college has tremendous resources, like most colleges and universities do, amazing resources available to students. But it's figuring out the best way to get students connected to those resources and to understand the value of those resources, and when is the right time for them to be connecting with those resources, so that it's not the week before finals that they seek tutoring, or it's not a month before they would like to study abroad. So understanding the resources that are available. So in our work, I have found that students don't know what they don't know, as David said, that we need, so we can say to a student, what do you need? But they don't, if they're not aware of what they need, we need to anticipate their needs, and we need to see through assessment and data where we're not meeting student needs, and then try to figure out a way to create a pathway so they are actively involved and contributors on campus. So one way that we have found is through this programming that we offer from the first day through graduation in varying levels. And we have a scholarship that we offer. It's a $1,000 scholarship after 1 year of participation in the program. So we use that as our incentive to get students involved in the program their first year. And then it's a $1,000 scholarship that the institution got on board with when they saw that our retention rate for students that participate in Cardinal First during their first year is 93%. It's averaged over the past 5 years, with cohorts of more than 100 students in each cohort. 93% return for their sophomore year, and our 4-year graduation rate is at 80% versus nationally, as you all know, it's about 27% for a 4-year graduation rate. So Felipe can talk more about this, but one of the things that I've learned in my experience is that the community matters. So there's many times I wish that I could tutor one-on-one, but we have 600 students that are participating in the program, so I don't get to mentor one-on-one, but my student leaders do. So Felipe can talk about that, but what the benefit of having that many students in it is there is a community, and at every one of our events, or workshops, there's at least 50 first-gen students at every workshop. So there's no way you can feel that you're the only one on this journey when you every time walk in a room and see 50 other people who are proud first-gen students. So that's one of the things, is that the community matters, the connection to resource matters, and that if students aren't engaging, that I need to do something differently. So I never stop asking myself, what could I do to reach those other students that aren't participating in the program? How could I make them see the value of it? And a big part of it is peer mentoring, because having Felipe contact a student and explain the resources is really beneficial. So I think that's.
And then finally, the student's role.
Okay, so as you'll all get to learn a little bit more about Felipe when he speaks. And Felipe, he came on campus. He had found a faculty mentor early on. He is a student that says, coach me, lead me, I want your advice. I want to learn from you. And what we need to keep asking ourselves is, how do we get every student to understand that it is coaching, and that we're trying to help with the insider knowledge, and that there is insider knowledge to understanding that maybe your job that pays more is still not as valuable as an internship a year before you graduate. And so even if you're going to get a lower paid internship, what the value of that is. So I think it's, again, meeting students where they are, and then helping them understand, if this is your goal, then this is something that can help you get to that goal, and to help students identify and be able to articulate the strengths that they bring to a situation. I think one of the things I've learned is that students struggle with imposter syndrome, like many even non-first gen students do, but there's a lot of imposter syndrome that goes on, and students will think that their job, if not directly relevant to what their career goal is, isn't been providing them with any training, when every single job has been providing them with fabulous training in terms of work ethic and dependability and reliability and working as part of a team and coachability. So helping them be able to articulate their strengths and talents and connect whatever it is they've been doing with work experience in their life to what they want to do afterwards, and to be able to talk about that.
Terrific, terrific. Dr. Gralon Johnson, you have a pretty interesting story about how you come to this space, because you're first gen. Maybe you want to reflect a bit?
Yeah, so I'll certainly share that, this work for me is very deeply personal, right? I shared with the group recently that, I'm one of 12. I have 11 siblings, and my mother and father did not cross a high school stage, right? In fact, college going was just not part and parcel of sort of the ethos in the family. And another thing that I often share with folks is that, just about every possible social and economic hardship one might fathom would confront a family of 14 who were just experiencing sort of intense poverty in St. Louis, which is where I grew up, was the reality for us. In fact, my ninth grade year of high school, all the way through what became my junior year of college, we were homeless. We lived in a one-bedroom motel, right? And I don't offer that story to induce sentiments of pity or sorrow, because the reality is that, in spite of the fact that those times were incredibly difficult, I was one of the eldest of my siblings, right? And so I was one of the first to sort of figure out that I didn't know what I didn't know. But what was especially powerful about that is that by the time things got to, sibling number 9 and 10, the conversation was no longer about how do I do this? It was about, where am I going to go, right? And so the pendulum had fundamentally swung. And as a matter of fact, as of last December, all 12 of us have have completed a college degree. And that is so incredibly powerful. And I think it's also speaks to what's so crucial from the student voice, and why it's important to leverage your own story to be able to model for folks that you can do that too, right? That's something I often will share. I will also just add one final point, major virtual high five to Julie, and that I echo all the sentiments shared, in that all of these factors are critically important. And I'd also say, from the institutional perspective, because before College Possible, I was coming from Iowa State University. And I have found that supporting our most vulnerable students must be embedded and championed throughout all levels of institutional governance, right? I remember at Iowa State, we launched an I'm First campaign that really helped to normalize first generation as an identity that's to be celebrated. And one of the final thing I'll share with this group is that part of the reason I think it was incredibly successful was because of how powerful it was to uncover how many senior administrators were in fact themselves first in their families to go to college and to own that identity as something to be proud of. I get goosebumps, my tear ducts are activated when I think about it. But I do think that that's critically important, that in addition to these initiatives that we set up, that we embed championing that identity as a part of the ethos for the institution.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And kudos to you and your siblings. That's quite a remarkable feat for any family. So that's awesome. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah,
about
definitely.
how do you view those pillars of success?
Yeah, I think this is where, as I reflect on it, context really matters. And so my context looks pretty different than some of the other panelists in that, like, Tulane was not ever set up to support first gen students, and we have a long way to go before we can say we've made real strides in that. And so for me, that the empathy for what first generation students need in terms of support services and really deeply understanding that has been an important part of my understanding over the last 4 years, and particularly the work of our Center for Academic Equity. We have a lot of systems that don't meet the needs of our first gen population, but also many other populations. And it's also, I think, been a challenge to convince people that by changing the system to meet the needs of first gen, we're actually going to meet the needs of all of our students better. And so that's been a key part of the process of developing relationships with those institutional leaders that may not be seeing the day-to-day experiences and the impacts of those experiences on our students. And I think also the university has committed in language and in theory to this idea of academic equity. And I think they've thought about that at the individual and interpersonal level, but really trying to push to, like, what does it look like to change institutional policy? And how do we change culture? One of the things I talked to a number of my scholars while preparing for this, but really two things that came out was, like, I need to feel like the university thinks I belong here, both in myself and in how I'm interacting with people in the Tulane community. And I need to know that I'm here for a reason and I am capable of being here and of doing the work. Even some of my scholars who, on paper have excelled the most, one of them was like, I always kind of said law school, but I didn't really make that commitment until I took a class with the law professor and was like, wait a minute, I can do this. Like, it's not beyond my intellectual capacity to go to law school. And that was just, like, chilling to me that it really, even, like, saying it took a while for him to actually believe it. So for me, that institutional support and understanding what students really need and how that can support all of our students more effectively has been important.
That's terrific. And Felipe, you are living this experience. You are soon to graduate. Congratulations. And maybe you share a bit about those three elements and how important they are. How important have they been in your pursuit of college success?
Yeah, to start, I just want to kind of talk about, like, my experience, because I think it's very applicable to many other first generation students. Because before I even started college, I didn't recognize that I was first gen. It was something that I didn't even know. I didn't know what that meant. I thought, like, my sister went to college, like she's first gen, like I'm not. Like, she has some resources available for me that I could use. But no, going into North Central, being a part of the program, the Cardinal First program, it's like Julie's there to really support you. She's like, her definition is, the first gen is not having both your parents go to get a bachelor's degree. So just by not even really recognizing I was first gen, I didn't really recognize the sort of position I was in, because at home, we never really spoke about college. It was kind of the scary word. It was like, ooh, it's college. Like, that's your job. That was my job. And that put a lot of pressure on me, because it's like, no one, like my parents, unfortunately, they don't have any resources for me to help. And they're rooting for me. They're able to tell their friends, like, oh yeah, my son's going to college. Like, this is such a big part, a big moment for our family. But then that just kind of leaves me hanging in college, because it's like, yeah, I want to talk to my parents about school, but it's like, when I run into issues, it's like, if I want to start looking for internships, jobs, it's like, they're really supportive, but they don't really have the information necessary. They don't have any connections with other people in that industry. So that's kind of where it was kind of hard for me to kind of get help from other people. And one of the big parts of how I started to, open up and start receive help was definitely from other students that were in my position. Because seeing my parents, you know, they were successful without going to college. So I had something in my head telling me like, oh, like I can do this by myself. Like my parents did this without anyone's help, so I can do it too. But it's just definitely not the case. Those other students there to kind of normalize this experience, like, hey, it's okay to get help. That was definitely a big point in my career. And that really stemmed from this Cardinal First program, because it's one thing for Julie to say, hey, like these are all the resources available, or for the institution to, you know, send out emails with all this information. But having another student in your position to say like, hey, like if you're struggling in this class, like really consider going to tutoring or the writing center to help with your papers. That is one of the parts that kind of connects you to all the resources that the institution has, because it's definitely easy to advertise all those, but you know, attracting those students to get there and kind of accepting help, that's one of the big struggles, sort of in my perspective as a student in that sense.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know, yeah. And then in terms of like the institution, I just kind of want to highlight what was already said. Just kind of highlight the point that the institution has so many resources available, but just students unfortunately don't know about that. And like in many cases, like they pay for these resources and they don't even utilize them, kind of just out of the fact that, you know, they don't know that they exist. So I think just kind of making that clear to the students to be like, hey, you know, you guys already paid for this, go take advantage of this. I think that's definitely vital to student success.
I appreciate that, and I agree. As a first generation college student myself, I really didn't appreciate, I guess, just those informational barriers and the value of peer mentoring and near peer mentoring and counselors that cared. I often, you know, worked with just at Midnight Golf, I worked with probably 3,000 students, and think oftentimes about Chanel Wilson, who just nobody in her family had a clue what was going on. She received a letter of acceptance, and that was it, from Tennessee State University. And on the day college starts, she shows up at Tennessee State University and tells everybody, hey, I'm here. And they're like, okay, and where are you staying? She's like, you sent me a letter that said I am accepted. I thought you had it from here. Long story short, incredible story short, she went back home, had to work a year, get herself together, back in college. She's now Dr. Chanel Wilson, because it took, she was not, you see her make that decision, you think, wow, she must not be very bright. And actually, she was quite intelligent. She was brilliant, in fact. She just didn't understand just the little tiny mechanics that go with, and that's the intuitive part that seems so normal. Like, why wouldn't you understand that? And if nobody has ever said anything to you about what's necessary beyond that letter, and she was in the program I was in, trying to help students understand that, she just heard that kind of closing signal, and that was enough for her. There are students that look at their financial award letters and they see expected family contribution 0. And so in their minds, they go, guess what? College is free for me. I've seen that reaction myself a million times. And it's obviously, that sounds like, wow, they must not know much. And we got to appreciate that they don't know that, but they do know a lot, especially about being successful. And so those are just a couple of things. Maybe we can reflect on some of the things we've learned that has shaped our work. Like, for me, it's speaking to what appears to be mundane for a lot of people, really talking to those minutia details about what it takes and how to sign and how to walk to your classes and find out where the buildings are. Just really basic things, even from the notion of selecting college. What have we learned? If we could go, Rebecca, I would start with you on this. What have we learned through our experience about what's conditioned your approach to this work? How's your work evolved as you've done this work?
I think just building on what you were saying about being really explicit, also like literally walking alongside, right? So you have this counseling service available to you. You've already paid for it as a part of like your tuition scholarship paid for this. You should utilize it. And you know what? We're going to walk together so this feels a little bit less scary, or we're going to call to make that appointment together. And I think I also realized that like many of my students students in my classes who aren't first gen also benefit from that. So that's one of the situations in which I see that like changing the way I work with my first gen students has changed my effectiveness with all of my students. I think really that like culture work with my students around like I belong and I'm capable has been really important, and helping other people on Tulane's campus recognize how important that is in terms of the culture that we create in our classrooms and within our programs and across the systems that students have to interact with. And then one of the other things that a couple of my scholars brought up is kind of balancing the like aspiration and reality of being on a predominantly white campus when you're a student of color or a first gen student. So my students had kind of different responses to that, where some felt like they were devastated by the fact that people didn't prepare them for the reality of navigating that space, while others felt like, oh, well, I got all these like horror stories and I'm worried that that might have prevented me from taking some risks and developing relationships that might have been really meaningful for me in my first year. So that's another thing that I haven't necessarily like totally figured out, but how do you kind of balance the reality of of the challenges of navigating the college campus might be without taking some of that optimism and ability to take risks and find meaning from those risks.
Great. Gralon, you obviously have a lot of lived experience and even practical experience with your family, but even through the work. How's your work evolved over the years through your experience?
Yeah, actually, this question really resonates with me. In fact, Rebecca, everything you said really hit close to home. And I would say sort of for the opposite reason, right? So I went to a historically Black college for undergrad. And, one of the things I said was I sort of didn't know what I didn't know. I shared with the group a couple of days ago that, I was graduating high school with a 3.9 GPA and a 32 on the ACT. And I didn't know at the time that meant I could have gone to a lot of places. I probably would have still ended up at a historically Black college just because of like the cultural indoctrination from my siblings. But I didn't know what my options were is the point, right? But I'll never forget my first year, second semester, when I met the guy who's my mentor now, who did exactly what Rebecca just said and was hearing me reflect on this story and was like, why are you not on an academic scholarship? And I'm like, what is that? And he literally grabbed my hand and walked me over to the financial aid. It did something. He was working in the development office at the time. He was 27. He just finished his doctorate, and he modeled that for me. His mentor was 27 when he finished his doctorate. I didn't even know what that was. And yet I finished my doctorate on my 27th birthday, right? Like, so it's just like how powerful, just like modeling, sort of walking the talk, how powerful that is. The last thing I'll add is, again, also sort of building from Rebecca's point, when I came to College Possible, where our students are going to institutions all over the country, right? And in many cases, these students are transitioning to predominantly white campuses. I remember flipping through our curriculum, like my first couple of months on the job, going, my goodness, like we've got to augment this so that it's more responsive. Like we have an obligation to support students with salient identities, right? And help to not just what it means to be first gen, but the intersection of those identities. What does it mean to be a student of color and first gen at a predominantly white campus? And so we've taken a number of steps, David, to start to transform our curriculum so that it's more responsive, right, to the evolving landscape of higher ed and the students who are on their way.
Terrific. Julie, you guys seem to be certainly not best in class, really tops in this supporting students' efforts. Are you still learning or?
Oh, yes, definitely still learning every year, every day. I just was on the phone this morning with a student who called and said she had gotten a call from somewhere they interviewed and they said this, and she said, they left her a message and she said, what does that mean? And I said, that's a job offer. That was a job offer, what they just said. And so then, to talk them through next steps. So none of us know anything that's a learned behavior. If nobody taught it to you, then you should not be faulted or and you need somebody to help you. You need somewhere to go to ask questions. And I think that's one of the most important places of, one of the most important pieces for institutions is to identify a person or a place that all first-gen students know they can go to with questions. And I tell our parents as they're coming in, if your child, we're trying to empower the students, but I tell the parents, if your child calls home and is very upset about a roommate issue or an advisor issue or a professor issue, say, why don't you go talk to Julie to see who you should talk to about that? So I connect them to who they need to talk to, but it just helps people to have a place to go to, I think. And Gralon has such a compelling story. I loved hearing it even today, again, for the second time this week. But and that's one of the pieces that I've learned is that sharing success stories is the most powerful thing we can do. So we really encourage our juniors and seniors and try to provide them with opportunities to share their stories. And when they work with our younger students, we ask them to share the bumps in the road, to try to normalize the obstacles that are just a part of life's journey. They're a part of the college journey. They're a part of life's journey. When I meet with the parents at orientation, I'll say, raise your hand if you lead a stress-free life. And of course, no one raises their hand. And so we also work with the students on obstacles are part of it. Just figure out how you're going to move yourself forward. And we ask our first-gen faculty and staff to share what didn't go right in their undergrad. So at all of our events, there's first-gen faculty or staff members. And I always tell them, the panelists heard me say this, I say, I don't want to hear anything about your PhD. I want to hear about what didn't go right when you were an undergrad and how you powered through it. So we have two professors that were academically dismissed as undergrads who now have their PhDs. We have a professor that called home every night crying the whole entire first year of college, but her parents wouldn't let her come home. And we have another professor who just shared a story of she was driving the college van her first semester of college and crashed it with 6 people in it and was just ready to quit because of that. So it really normalizes whatever the obstacles are that students are experiencing. So I think students sharing their stories, including their obstacles, like Felipe's, a semester away from graduation. And so for him to share how overwhelmed he felt when he was a first year and things like that, that's just very powerful. And we try to normalize, like others have said, what the experience is for them. And I feel like I'm learning every day. And this year, Felipe will tell you, when we ask students to RSVP for events, the sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we know we won't get accurate RSVPs from the first years, and we don't expect that. So the rest we do just so we can plan for food. And when they RSVP, I ask them to tell me one thing going well for them right now and one challenge they're facing. And then that informs what content I include in the workshop and who I reach out to individually based on what they're saying their challenge is. And also hearing when they share one thing that's going well that I know had been a struggle for them previously. It's helpful and it informs my work. And I'll say, Felipe, you were at that conference. Can you connect, so-and-so to that? So it's also connecting students who've had shared experiences. But I continue to learn every day. There's no shortage of ideas of what I could be doing better, what we could be doing better as an institution. I'm fortunate to have very good institutional support, but there's just a shortage in the hours in the day and the staffing that we continue to work on.
That's terrific. Felipe, you are currently a peer mentor. You will soon be a veteran. So you have what are you hearing most often from your students? What question do you find yourself answering over and over again? Or what advice do you find yourself directing to students consistently?
Yeah, so I kind of just want to start hit on the point that about community. Like that has been such a big part of kind of retaining students. Going to these monthly workshops, you really get to see the same faces over and over again. And then eventually you see them in the dining hall, you see them walking to class, and that just kind of helps with like, it's a conversation starter. It's like, hey, you're first gen too. It's like, that just kind of helps you like make friends on campus and really helps with just the overall kind of ease the stress. But a lot of the advice that I like to give students is kind of with like making a goal at the end. Like, what's your goal? What are you working towards now? Because I think that's really what leads students to success, is having a goal and then kind of breaking it down from there, having a plan. That goal can be drastically different for different students. Some students, they go in declared, don't have a major declared, they're undecided. So maybe goals for them would just to be, you know, find what they really like, find their major, what they want to do. Other people, it's just to find that fancy job at the end, graduate senior year and get that fancy job offer. Other students, it's to go grad school. So being able to just get your goal and then be divided, like, okay, if I want to get that job at the end, what do I have to do my first year? So I really have to hammer down, take the right classes, you know, get a good GPA, and that can lead me up to my sophomore year where I can start getting internships, and then just kind of get that on hands experience with whatever industry you're looking to go into. So I think that's kind of the thing that I've been instilling into students. It's kind of like, even if it's just kind of asking like, oh, so like, what are you majoring in? And that kind of leads to other things like, oh, well, what do you want to do with that? And it's like, oh, like, if you want to go into grad school, like, oh, you really need to start doing your research, consider independent studies. Like, that's very common, and kind of, as Julie said, is just normalizing what students experiencing. I think that's very critical, because a lot of students they have all this stress, they have all these problems, and they think it's just them. But that's actually the opposite. Like, everyone goes through very similar struggles. So just being able to talk that through and be like, okay, like, I've had that exact same experience. This is how I dealt with it. You know, consider doing that, or exploring other options, or connecting them to other students. Like, oh, hey, you're a bio major. Like, oh, I know, have you met person A? They're also bio major. They have really good things to say about this hospital that they worked at or something. So just building that community, I think, really just stems, or success really stems from building that community. Students, especially those first gen students.
That's terrific. I was recently at the Michigan Chamber of Commerce meeting, and we were talking about policy, higher ed policy, and they asked the question I'm going to ask, and it was, if you could change one thing, if you could just eliminate one barrier, what would it be? And my answer was the financial award letters. I deal with students who attend over 100 different colleges and universities around the country, and it's thousands of them. And if the financial award letter looked the same for everybody, that would just help a lot, because everyone requires some dialect of Japanese to figure out, and you know, they have no idea what the codes mean. And you know, you talk about needing some information. You need real information to help navigate just some of the award letters. So that's mine. Rebecca, what would you change? Just one thing.
So I'm going to speak to my specific program, which is the PASI scholarship, where they get full tuition scholarships. Mm-hmm. Something we've been talking about is like, what would it look like for full tuition scholarships to mean we will invest whatever it takes for you to graduate, because we know that full tuition does not cover all of the costs, both related to school and related to everything happening in life outside of school.
That's good. Gralon.
Yeah,
hand you the magic wand.
Yeah, I am pretty passionate about this in particular. I would say access to information, especially in high school, certainly, right? And I think that's one of the things that I love so much about working with College Possible, is that we start with students before that time period where it's like, oh, snap, right? But like, that shouldn't be an impediment, regardless of what your like family socioeconomic predicament is, right? Like, access to information, right? Helping to sort of normalize how we talk about what's expected, how you finance, pay for higher ed. These critical data points that get missed with these incredibly talented students. You know, to me, that's just unacceptable. So I think if we could, you know, figure out how to augment how we create access to information early on, I think that would be monumental.
Got you. Julie, any barriers you'd knock over?
Well, in my current role, I don't work a lot with high school students and getting them access. We are now doing first gen visit days, so that and we've had a dramatic increase in the amount of interest. So high school guidance counselors bringing their first gen students to our campus. So with my magic wand, I would like to connect earlier with high school students where they're making their course selections in 9th grade and understanding how that is going to impact their opportunities later on, and their parents, because I will talk to high school students who say, I'm getting straight A's and never doing any homework outside of school, but they're not putting themselves into AP classes when they obviously do have the ability to do that. And the second, when they're in college, what I wish that what we know to be high impact practices and like hugely impact the success of students. So having an internship like Felipe is going to get Felipe multiple job offers and higher salaries and a shorter job search. I wish that we knew what, because we know what a lot of those high impact practices are, that they're a requirement and nobody leaves our doors without having those experiences as part of their 4 years of college or 5 years of college.
Excellent, terrific. Felipe, you mentioned community. I'm going to kind of lean into one of the questions that I saw in the chat box. How would you, if you were invited to a university to start a mentoring program, you mentioned community and the importance of that and the kinds of meetings and frequencies you didn't go into, but if you could, how would you, inform somebody about how to go about doing that? What would be important to consider?
I think the one-to-one interactions with students, without like from one student mentor to another student mentor, I think is just critical. Being able to give advice on a lot of things that are often like missed. Like little things about like even going to professors' office hours. Like some students don't even consider that. They don't really know what that means. It's like, what do I go to their office for if I don't have a question on the homework? And then, that's where our student mentors were. He's like, oh, you could just go say hi, start building a connection. And situations like that, I think is what really helps those students with those very like basic problems that you kind of don't really think about. They're kind of overlooked. But those are like for first year students, those are like the biggest things. It's like final exams are coming, though, like how do I handle that? And then that's where a lot of effort could be going into those student leaders and kind of training them to be kind of normalize that experience for those students, because that's kind of those surprisingly those little things are really what scare those students the most. Those little problems, those are the smallest obstacles that cause the biggest troubles for students. So I think really investing, of course, it may not always be possible to get one group together of students and assigning like one mentor for that group. That's also very effective because it also kind of builds a network between those group students, even if it's not a one-on-one with their mentor. I think that could be very valuable.
Terrific. Anybody else want to add to that insight about building? Julie, you probably have some thoughts.
I was thinking, just as Felipe was saying, they don't know they can go to office hours. When I was a faculty member on the campus, which I was for the first 17 years, I taught a first year course in the fall. So, and previously I taught high school. So I would have students in I loved teaching the students in their first semester of college, but they would raise their hand to ask if they could go to the washroom. I mean, because nobody transitions you from the little details that Felipe is talking about how high school works and how college works. And so even building that in and explaining a little bit more of that, and what you call a professor and how you call staff members by their first names generally, what you call faculty, you call faculty doctor, default to doctor or professor if you're not sure, and why that matters to people and how to refer them. So there's so much, I call it insider knowledge, or like the hidden culture of success of college, of what you're expected to know and a certain behavior. And so we do work on those in Cardinal First about some of those things. And also that the first time they take final exams, a lot of the first year students think they have to sit there through the whole exam time, because in high school they did. And in college, you don't. You get to get up and walk out when you're done, but just explaining all the little pieces. And so we try to capture at the end of the first year what they learned and what they know at the end of their first year that they wish they knew at the beginning, because by junior year, it becomes second nature. You don't even remember that all those questions and struggles that you had. So to just keep identifying. And one thing not completely related, but that we try to do to reinforce the people on our campus who are doing great work with our first gen students is to recognize them. So we'll be doing that tomorrow with our first years. Tomorrow's our last first year workshop of the year. And generally we meet in person, but we ask them to each write, we give them thank you notes, to write 3 thank you notes to faculty or staff on campus who have been a positive part of their first year. So we do it at the end of the first semester, end of the first year, and we talk to them about how this is a personal and professional habit that builds their network. And it also reinforces faculty and staff on our campus who are doing great work with first gens to do the same thing next year with first gen. So it's beneficial to the student, beneficial to the campus. And we have faculty that have those hanging all over their office doors, hanging all, one of them carries them in her purse, one of the political science professors. So it's meaningful to the faculty member, and it's also building our program. And then I do provide letters to the deans of the different schools and colleges, letting them know which faculty members made time to engage with our programs this year and help them with their tenure and their promotion process. And I do that a little tiny bit to benefit those people and a big bit to benefit my first gen students and the work those people are doing on our campus.
That's terrific. We have about 8-9 minutes left or so. I want to kind of, as we begin to close here, think about, you mentioned earlier, Julia, about the value, seeing first generation college students as valuable to the campus. What inspires you? If I could start with Rebecca on this one. What inspires you about first generation college students?
I mean, my scholars have amazingly massive dreams, and those dreams are for themselves and their families and the people who come after them. And so they're incredibly meaningful and full of purpose, and they are so enthusiastic about what they want to do and how they want to change the world. And I think that optimism and that enthusiasm has fueled both me and them through some of the challenging times. And I mean, my scholars are graduating, so they're starting to figure out kind of what's next. And every time I hear them talk about, like, I know what's next and I'm so excited about it, I think that really brings a lot of meaning to some of the difficult conversations around, like, the F at the midterm and not knowing if we're going to be able to pay the financial aid bill by the end of the semester, things like that.
Terrific. Felipe, you are quite an inspiration. You have some peers, you see them the same, they ever inspire you as well?
Yeah, it's definitely like the resilience for other first gen students that I've seen is very impressive. Maybe just for the fact that like we don't really know what to like. Okay, like we want to get this fancy job at the end. It's like we don't really know what the path is going to look like. So if we get like some rejections for internships, it's like, okay, like that's okay, like okay, well, one won't hurt or a few won't hurt. But I just think like they get these failures, but that's a good sign. That means like, okay, you're really pushing yourself to go further along. And then that's one of the strong suits that I see a lot of my first gen peers is there's a lot of obstacles in the way, but they just keep going back up after they get knocked down, which I think is very impressive. Builds good character, definitely. So.
Absolutely. And Dr. Johnson, I'm sure once Oprah hears your story, a movie will be made. But what inspires you about not only yourself, the people that you work with and your siblings? I mean, what a story.
Yeah, I would say that the pursuit is typically bigger than themselves. That's probably where I draw the most inspiration from first generation students. So I'd echo everything that's already been said, but I think that there's just something incredibly powerful when the end goal is something that's to be shared and celebrated with the people who love you the most in the world. And that's why you get such a raucous reaction when they walk across that stage, because the feat represents something that transcends just you going to those classes each day and navigating this hidden curriculum and pushing when you really wanted to throw in the towel. And so I think that that's incredibly powerful and where I am most inspired from first gen students.
That's terrific. So you mentioned earlier, you incited this question actually about the value for first generation students. What did you mean by that?
I actually don't remember what my comment was about the value for first gen students, but in speaking to what inspires me is to watch, as you have all said, graduation. I'm so sad this year about not being able to meet the families that I was so looking forward to meeting. We're trying to come up with other ways to do that, but one of the blessings of my current role is that I work with students for all 4 years. So when I was faculty, I taught junior and senior level courses. I wouldn't meet them until they were a year and a half from graduation. So now I get to see them as first years and watch them grow. And when they cross that graduation stage, and I know the obstacles that they have overcome to get across that stage, it is just so moving and so inspirational. And then when I get my 2024s that'll come in next fall, and somebody will encounter an obstacle, I'll be able to tell them about this person that just walked across the graduation stage who experienced the exact same thing, and this is how they worked through it. So I think the resilience that everybody's talked to is very inspirational. And I just think there's value in sharing all these success stories. Like of all of our 2020 grads, I'm trying to figure out the best ways now to share their stories. We have one young lady who is going to walk across the graduation stage virtually at age 28, 10 years after she started the journey. And the last 3 years, she has been a full-time student and a full-time retail store manager and manage a chronic illness. And she is doing it. It is incredible. And she's going to grad school now. And after just a lot of bumps in the road, she hasn't had the traditional experience at all, but she just said, I was getting my degree and there was nothing that was going to stop me. And so, oftentimes when I talk to the students and say, you should share your story or make sure you include that in your personal statement for grad school, many times they aren't even aware of what a story that is because it's just their reality and that's what they know. And so last year we had a student that graduated who was going on to medical school. He was the youngest of 5 kids, the only one to go to college. Neither of his parents had finished elementary school even before they immigrated to the country. And I had asked him if he was including that in his personal statement. And he said, well, no, that just didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. He was focusing on what undergraduate research he had done and things like that. So helping students understand, like Gralon's story, I private messaged Gralon in the group chat here saying, if you have a narrative of that story or a video of that story, it's so compelling. It really does need to be shared. So if Oprah doesn't pick it up, Gralon, I hope someone else does.
I'll take that.
That is terrific. Well, we are here got a couple minutes left. Any closing remarks? We'll start with Gralon, if you don't mind. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the landscape of higher education is evolving, right? And I don't need to tell anybody on this call that, the things that we are experiencing at present with COVID-19 will undoubtedly have a direct impact on higher education of the future. And, all indicators suggest will disproportionately impact our most vulnerable students. And so I think that this is exactly the right time to be having these kinds of conversations and, quite frankly, to leverage our collective resources, our collective ideas, and to activate those things so that we can serve more students better.
Terrific. Rebecca, if you would.
Yeah, so I think things like this can feel like there are certain people that have it all together. And I just want to reiterate that I'm figuring it out every single day. And I've messed up with my students and I've regretted not saying something sooner or saying something in a certain way. So I think just acknowledging that we're all in it together. And I think all of us would be open to continuing this conversation, in the future.
Terrific. Felipe, if you would, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to kind of highlight the emphasis on supporting not just first-gen students, but all types of students, because there's points where I kind of forget all the resources that are available to me provided by this first generation program. I'll talk to other students that aren't a part of this program, and I'll be like, oh, do you have your resume yet? The program at North Central, they require you to have a resume at the end of your first year. So talking to other students, it's like, oh yeah, just submit your resume for this internship. And they're like, wait, I don't have a resume yet. So I just kind of think not only should we be supporting first-gen students, but also expanding that to all students, not just those that are very successful, that are the nice story for the college, but all students should be getting all those same resources, support.
Excellent. Thank you. Julie?
Well, and Felipe's comment speaks to Rebecca's comment that anything we do to support first-gen students is going to better serve all the students in the school. My background's in special education, and the more effectively we teach students who struggle with learning, the more effectively we teach every student in the classroom. So it all speaks to that. So I think that I think it's a blessing to work in this space. I really think it's a blessing to have work that is that we know is very meaningful. So it makes it easy to work hard in this space. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone. We do have on North Central College's website a Cardinal First page with student testimonials, parent testimonials, outlines of our workshops and things like that. But thank you, David.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being part of this discussion, allowing me to be your facilitator. I really enjoyed it. And back to Kate.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful discussion. Thanks for your good work and for such a good discussion. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.